Margaret Thompson had lived her entire adult life as a simple woman in the quiet village of Brambleworth. At 73 years old, she spent her days tending to her small garden, reading novels, and occasionally helping at the local church bazaar. Her neighbors knew her as a kind widow who kept to herself, never speaking much about her past. They assumed she had always been ordinary, just like them. What none of them knew was that Margaret carried a secret so enormous it could shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. Hidden away in a locked wooden box beneath her floorboards lay documents, photographs, and letters that told a story she had promised never to reveal. For 7 decades she had kept her word, even as the weight of the truth grew heavier with each passing year. The secret began in 1953, when Margaret was just a young woman working as a seamstress in London. She had been employed by a wealthy family who often received mysterious visitors late at night. The lady of the house, Mrs. Victoria Ashworth, was known for her charitable work and her close connections to high society. What Margaret didn't know then was that Mrs. Ashworth was actually serving as a secret guardian for someone very special. One cold winter evening, Margaret was asked to stay late to finish some urgent alterations. As she worked by lamplight in the sewing room, she heard unfamiliar voices coming from upstairs. Curiosity got the better of her, and she quietly made her way toward the sounds. Through a crack in the door, she saw something that would change her life forever. A woman in an elegant coat was holding a baby, speaking in hushed, urgent tones with Mrs. Ashworth. The woman's face was partially hidden by shadows, but there was something regal about her posture, something that commanded respect even in whispered conversation. The baby, wrapped in the finest blankets Margaret had ever seen, was being handed over with obvious reluctance and pain. Margaret watched as the mysterious woman kissed the child's forehead one last time, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She heard fragments of conversation that made her blood run cold. Words like protection, scandal, and throne floated through the air like dangerous secrets. The woman spoke about ensuring the child would be safe, loved, and provided for, but could never know his true identity. Mrs. Ashworth accepted the baby with solemn understanding, promising to raise him as her own son. The mysterious woman removed a signet ring from her finger and placed it in a small velvet pouch, along with several official-looking documents. She instructed Mrs. Ashworth to keep these items safe, saying they would be the only proof of the child's true heritage should anything ever happen to her. As the woman prepared to leave, she turned back one more time. In that moment, a beam of moonlight fell across her face and Margaret's heart nearly stopped. She recognized those features immediately. They belonged to Queen Elizabeth II herself. The young queen, who had been crowned just months before, was secretly giving away her own child. Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle her gasp of shock. She watched as the queen walked to the window, looking back at the baby one final time before disappearing into the night. Mrs. Ashworth stood holding the infant, tears streaming down her face as she understood the magnitude of what had just been entrusted to her care. The baby would grow up as James Ashworth, never knowing that royal blood flowed through his veins. He would live a comfortable but unremarkable life, attending good schools and eventually becoming a successful businessman. Mrs. Ashworth would love him as her own son, but she would carry the burden of his true identity until her death 30 years later. Margaret, meanwhile, had witnessed something that could destroy the monarchy if it ever became public knowledge. She understood instinctively that what she had seen must never be spoken of. Not to anyone. Not ever. The next morning, Mrs. Ashworth called her aside and, with eyes full of knowledge and fear, made Margaret swear an oath of silence. From that day forward, Margaret's life was forever changed. She had become the keeper of a royal secret, bound by loyalty and fear to protect the crown from a scandal that could bring down the entire institution. She left London soon after, moving to the countryside where she hoped the weight of what she knew might feel lighter. But secrets have a way of growing heavier with time, and Margaret's burden only increased as the years passed. She watched from afar as James Ashworth lived his life, successful and happy, completely unaware of his true parentage. She saw Queen Elizabeth reign with dignity and strength, never knowing if the Queen ever thought about the son she had given away. As Margaret entered her 70s, she began to wonder what would happen to the secret when she died. The truth would die with her unless she found a way to ensure it survived. She had spent decades protecting the crown, But now she wondered if the time had come for the truth to finally emerge. The wooden box beneath her floorboards contained more than just documents and photographs. It held the power to rewrite history, to reveal that the royal family had hidden an heir for 70 years. Margaret had guarded this secret faithfully, but as her health began to decline, she realized that some secrets are too important to take to the grave. Little did she know that her carefully guarded secret was about to be exposed in the most unexpected way possible, and that a loyal royal guard would be the one to bring this shocking truth to light. Captain William Hayes had served in the Royal Guard for over 30 years, dedicating his life to protecting the crown with unwavering loyalty. At 55, he was one of the most trusted members of the palace security team, known for his discretion, attention to detail, and absolute commitment to duty. His colleagues respected him, and the royal family had come to rely on his steady presence during both routine events and moments of crisis. William had grown up dreaming of serving the monarchy. His father had been a palace groundskeeper, and from childhood William had been fascinated by the grandeur and tradition of royal life. He joined the Royal Guard as a young man and worked his way up through the ranks, earning commendations for his service and building a reputation as someone who could be trusted with the most sensitive assignments. Over the years, William had been privy to countless private moments and confidential information. He had learned to see without appearing to watch, to hear without seeming to listen. His discretion had made him invaluable to the palace, and he took pride in being someone the royal family could count on to keep their secrets safe. But on a rainy Tuesday morning in October, William's world was turned upside down by a phone call that would challenge everything he believed about his duty to the crown. The call came from his elderly aunt, Sarah Hayes, who lived in the small village of Brambleworth. Sarah was crying, barely able to speak through her tears as she explained that her dear friend and neighbor, Margaret Thompson, had passed away during the night. William had met Margaret several times over the years when visiting his aunt. She had always seemed like a pleasant, quiet woman who kept to herself. Sarah explained that Margaret had no living relatives, and as her closest friend, she had been asked to help sort through Margaret's belongings. The local solicitor needed someone trustworthy to assist with the estate, and Sarah had immediately thought of her nephew. William requested leave from his duties, explaining to his superiors that he needed to help with a family matter. The palace granted his request without question. His years of faithful service had earned him such consideration. He drove to Brambleworth that afternoon, expecting to spend a few days helping his aunt deal with paperwork and personal effects. Sarah met him at Margaret's cottage, a small but well-maintained property surrounded by beautiful gardens. As they entered the house together, Sarah explained that Margaret had been very specific about wanting someone trustworthy to handle her personal papers. She had mentioned William by name, which had surprised Sarah since Margaret had only met him a few times. The cottage was neat and organized, filled with the simple belongings of a woman who had lived modestly but comfortably. William began sorting through documents in Margaret's small study, while Sarah worked in the bedroom. Most of what he found was exactly what he expected: utility bills, correspondence with local shops, church newsletters, and other mundane papers that accumulate over a lifetime. But as William worked his way through the desk drawers, he noticed something odd. The floorboards in one corner of the study looked different from the rest, as if they had been lifted and replaced many times over the years. His security training had taught him to notice such details, and his curiosity was aroused. When he knelt down to examine the floorboards more closely, he found they were loose. Carefully lifting them, he discovered a hidden space beneath the floor. Inside was an old wooden box, heavy and solid, with an intricate lock that had been carefully maintained despite its age. Attached to the box was an envelope with his name written in Margaret's careful handwriting. William's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter that would change his understanding of everything he had dedicated his life to protecting. Margaret's words were careful and precise, explaining that she had chosen him specifically because of his position and his reputation for absolute loyalty to the crown. The letter revealed that Margaret had been keeping a secret for 70 years, a secret so explosive that it could shake the monarchy to its foundations. She explained that she had witnessed something in 1953 that had burdened her ever since, and that she believed the time had come for the truth to be revealed by someone who would handle it with the care and discretion it deserved. Margaret wrote that she had observed William during his visits and had recognized in him the same loyalty that had kept her silent for 7 decades. She believed that if anyone could be trusted to decide how to handle such sensitive information, it would be someone who had dedicated his life to protecting the royal family. The letter contained the key to the wooden box and instructions for William to examine its contents carefully. Margaret warned him that what he would find would test his understanding of duty, loyalty, and truth. She explained that she had chosen not to take the secret to her grave because she believed that some truths are too important to die with their keepers. As William inserted the key into the lock, his heart pounded with anticipation and dread. His training told him that secrets were kept for good reasons, but his conscience whispered that truth had its own value. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the quiet cottage like thunder. Inside the box, William found a collection of items that took his breath away. Photographs that appeared to show a young Queen Elizabeth in private moments, official documents bearing royal seals, personal letters written in elegant handwriting, and a signet ring that gleamed with unmistakable authenticity. But most shocking of all was a birth certificate that made William's blood run cold. The document, bearing all the proper official markings and seals, recorded the birth of a child to Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. But this was not Prince Charles, whose birth was public knowledge. This was another child, born months before the Queen's coronation, a child whose existence had been hidden from the world for 7 decades. William sat back on his heels, staring at the documents in disbelief. As a member of the Royal Guard, he knew the official history of the royal family better than most people. He knew every public birth, every announced pregnancy, every member of the line of succession. But here was proof of a child who had been erased from official history, hidden away to protect the crown from scandal. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If these documents were authentic, and everything about them suggested they were, then there was a living heir to the British throne who had been denied his rightful place in the royal family. A man who had grown up as James Ashworth, never knowing his true identity, while his mother ruled the nation he should have helped lead. William's hands shook as he continued examining the contents of the box. Each item told part of a story that challenged everything he thought he knew about the institution he had served so faithfully. The young queen, faced with an impossible situation, had made a choice that protected the monarchy, but condemned her own child to a life of unknowing exile from his birthright. As the afternoon light faded outside Margaret's cottage, William sat surrounded by the most dangerous secret in British history, knowing that his next decision would define not only his own future, but potentially the future of the crown itself. William spent the entire night in Margaret's cottage, poring over every document, photograph, and letter in the wooden box. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of what had happened in 1953, and the weight of the discovery pressed down on him like a physical burden. As dawn broke over the quiet village, he realized that his life had been irrevocably changed by what he had found. The documents told a story that was both heartbreaking and shocking. In 1953, the young Princess Elizabeth had secretly given birth to a child before her coronation. The timing would have created an enormous scandal. An unmarried future queen with a child would have threatened the very stability of the monarchy during a crucial transition period. The decision to hide the child's existence had been made at the highest levels, with only a handful of trusted individuals knowing the truth. Among the papers, William found detailed records showing that the child had been placed with Victoria Ashworth, a woman of impeccable reputation who had close ties to the royal household. Mrs. Ashworth had been carefully selected for her discretion and her ability to provide the child with a loving home while maintaining absolute secrecy about his origins. The arrangement had been designed to protect both the child and the crown. What struck William most powerfully was a series of personal letters written by the young queen to Mrs. Ashworth over the years. These letters, written in the queen's own hand, revealed the profound pain of a mother who had been forced to give up her child for the sake of duty. She wrote about watching from afar as James grew up, celebrating his achievements in secret and grieving her inability to be part of his life. In one particularly moving letter dated 1960, the Queen wrote about seeing James at a school sports day, having arranged to attend under the pretense of supporting a charity event. She described the agony of watching her son receive a prize while being unable to congratulate him, forced to remain a stranger to the child she loved more than her own life. The letter spoke of sleepless nights filled with regret and the constant fear that she had made the wrong choice. William also found medical records, school reports, and photographs that chronicled James's life from infancy through adulthood. Mrs. Ashworth had been meticulous in documenting his development, clearly understanding that someday this information might be needed. The photographs showed a boy who bore a striking resemblance to other members of the royal family, particularly around the eyes and the shape of his jaw. Perhaps most compelling was a DNA analysis report dated just 5 years earlier. Margaret's letter explained that as James entered his 70s and began researching his family history, Mrs. Ashworth had become concerned about maintaining the secret. Before her death, she had arranged for DNA samples to be obtained and analyzed, confirming beyond any doubt that James Ashworth was indeed the biological son of Queen Elizabeth II. The implications were staggering. James Ashworth, now 70 years old and living quietly in Scotland as a retired businessman, was technically the eldest child of the Queen. Under normal circumstances, he would have been first in line to the throne, ahead of King Charles III. His existence had been hidden so successfully that even he remained unaware of his true parentage. William found himself facing an impossible decision. As a member of the Royal Guard, his duty was to protect the crown and maintain its secrets. Everything in his training and his oath of service told him to secure these documents and ensure they never saw the light of day. The revelation of James's existence would create a constitutional crisis unlike anything in British history. But as he read the Queen's letters and saw the evidence of her lifelong suffering, William began to question whether protecting the institution was worth perpetuating such injustice. James had lived his entire life believing he was an ordinary man, never knowing that he was born to royalty. The Queen had endured 7 decades of grief over the child she could never acknowledge. The truth had been buried so deeply that it had poisoned the lives of everyone it touched. William's Aunt Sarah found him, still sitting among the documents when she arrived that morning to continue sorting through Margaret's belongings. Her eyes widened when she saw the papers spread across the floor, and William realized he would have to trust her with at least part of the truth. He explained that Margaret had left behind some very sensitive historical documents that needed careful handling. Sarah, who had known Margaret for over 20 years, wasn't entirely surprised. She told William that Margaret had always seemed to carry some deep sadness, as if she were burdened by knowledge that caused her pain. In recent years, Margaret had spoken increasingly about the importance of truth and justice, and about her belief that some secrets became harmful when kept too long. As William began carefully repacking the documents, he found one final item at the bottom of the box, a more recent letter from Margaret, dated just 6 months before her death. In this letter, she revealed that she had been quietly investigating James Ashworth's current life and had discovered something that made her decision to reveal the truth even more urgent. James's own son, Margaret had learned, had been diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that required extensive medical treatment. The young man's doctors had requested detailed family medical history to guide their treatment decisions, but James could provide no information about his biological parents. Margaret realized that the hidden truth wasn't just about royal succession or historical justice. It was literally a matter of life and death for James's family. This revelation hit William like a thunderbolt. The secret wasn't just affecting James and the Queen anymore. It was potentially harming an innocent young man who needed access to royal medical records that could save his life. Suddenly, the moral calculus became much more complicated. William spent the rest of the day walking through the village, trying to process everything he had learned. The peaceful countryside setting seemed almost surreal when contrasted with the explosive nature of his discovery. He thought about his 30 years of faithful service, about the oaths he had sworn, and about the trust that had been placed in him. But he also thought about justice, truth, and the human cost of keeping secrets. He thought about James Ashworth, who had lived his entire life as a lie, and about the Queen, who had sacrificed her relationship with her firstborn son for the sake of duty. Most urgently, he thought about James's son, whose life might depend on information that was locked away with this secret. As evening approached, William knew he could not make this decision alone. The discovery was too significant, the implications too far-reaching. He needed to find James Ashworth and confront him with the truth, but first he needed to understand exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. The fate of the monarchy might well depend on how one unsuspecting 70-year-old man reacted to learning that his entire life had been built on a carefully constructed lie. That night, William made a decision that would change the course of British history. He would travel to Scotland to meet James Ashworth, not yet to reveal the truth, but to observe him and assess his character. Only then would he decide whether the secret that had been hidden for 70 years should finally be brought to light. 3 days later, William found himself driving through the Scottish Highlands toward the small town of Invermoriston, where James Ashworth had lived quietly for the past 15 years. The journey gave him time to think about his approach and to rehearse the conversation that would either change history or confirm his decision to keep the secret buried forever. William had done his research carefully. James Ashworth was 70 years old, a widower who had retired from running a successful engineering consulting firm. He had married his university sweetheart Elizabeth in 1975, and they had raised 2 children together. His wife had died 5 years earlier from cancer, and since then James had lived alone in a modest cottage overlooking Loch Ness, spending his time reading, gardening, and volunteering at the local heritage center. By all accounts, James was a well-respected member of his community. Neighbors described him as kind, intelligent, and generous with his time. He had served on the town council for several years and had organized numerous charity drives for local causes. The picture that emerged was of a man who had lived a good life, contributing positively to his community while remaining unaware of his extraordinary heritage. William parked his car in the village center and spent the morning observing from a distance. He watched as James walked to the local shop, greeting several people along the way with warm smiles and friendly conversation. There was something dignified about his bearing, something that reminded William of photographs he had seen of the Queen in her younger years. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. At the Heritage Center, William posed as a tourist interested in local history. James was volunteering that day, leading a small group through exhibits about the area's past. William was struck by James's knowledge and passion for history, his ability to bring the past to life through vivid storytelling. There was an authority in his manner, a natural leadership quality that seemed to command respect without effort. During the tour, James spoke about the importance of preserving historical truth, even when it was uncomfortable or challenging. He told the group that history belonged to everyone, not just those in power, and that understanding the past was essential for making sense of the present. His words carried a weight that made William's heart pound with their ironic relevance. After the tour, William lingered in the center, pretending to study displays while listening to James interact with visitors. He heard James patiently answer questions, share additional stories, and offer recommendations for other historical sites to visit. The man's genuine enthusiasm for helping others learn was evident in every interaction. What struck William most was James's obvious integrity. When a visitor asked about a controversial local legend, James carefully distinguished between documented historical facts and unverified stories, refusing to present speculation as truth. His commitment to accuracy and honesty was exactly the quality William had hoped to find, but it also made his mission more complicated. Later that afternoon, William engineered a casual encounter at the local pub where James often had his evening meal. He introduced himself as a tourist exploring the Highlands and struck up a conversation about the area's history. James was immediately friendly and engaging, inviting William to join him for dinner and sharing stories about the region's past. As the evening progressed, William found himself genuinely liking James. The older man was intelligent, well-read, and possessed a dry sense of humor that reminded William of Prince Philip's wit. James spoke lovingly about his late wife, proudly about his children, and with concern about his grandson's ongoing medical struggles. The worry in his eyes when he mentioned his grandson's condition made William's decision even more urgent. James explained that his grandson, David, was 25 years old and had been diagnosed with a rare blood disorder. The doctors had made some progress with treatment, but they needed detailed family medical history to develop the most effective long-term care plan. James expressed frustration at his inability to provide this information, explaining that he had been adopted and knew nothing about his biological parents' health backgrounds. The irony was almost unbearable for William. Here was a man whose son's life might depend on access to the extensive medical records maintained by the royal family. Yet he had no idea that such information existed. The Queen's personal physicians had decades of detailed health data that could potentially save David's life, but it remained locked away behind the wall of secrecy that had protected James's true identity. As the conversation continued, James revealed more about his family situation. He explained that he had always known he was adopted, but Mrs. Ashworth had told him that his birth parents had died in a car accident when he was very young. She had provided him with forged documents that supported this story, ensuring that he would never question his origins or attempt to search for his biological family. James spoke warmly about Mrs. Ashworth, describing her as a loving mother who had given him every advantage in life. He had never felt the need to search for his birth parents because she had provided him with such a stable, nurturing upbringing. The gratitude in his voice made William understand the full complexity of Mrs. Ashworth's sacrifice. She had raised another woman's child as her own, knowing that her love and devotion would never be publicly acknowledged. But James also revealed something that made William's blood run cold. He mentioned that his grandson David had recently become interested in genealogy and had been researching the family's history. David had submitted DNA samples to several genetic databases, hoping to find distant relatives who might have information about the family's medical background. William realized that if David's DNA profile was extensive enough, it might eventually flag connections to other members of the royal family. The genetic databases were becoming increasingly sophisticated, and a close match between David and any royal family members who had participated in genetic research could expose the secret that had been hidden for 70 years. The urgency of the situation suddenly became clear to William. The secret might not remain hidden much longer, regardless of his decision. If David's genetic research uncovered the truth, it would emerge in a chaotic, uncontrolled way that could be devastating for everyone involved. At least if William revealed the secret carefully, it could be managed and handled with dignity. As the evening wound down, James walked with William back to his car. Under the star-filled Highland sky, James spoke about his philosophy of life, his belief that truth and honesty were the foundation of all meaningful relationships. He talked about the importance of family, the pain of losing his wife and his hopes for his grandson's recovery. William felt the weight of the secret pressing down on him as he listened to this good man speak about values that the royal family had compromised in order to protect their institution. James deserved to know the truth about his origins. His grandson deserved access to potentially life-saving medical information, and the Queen deserved to finally acknowledge the son she had been forced to abandon. That night, lying in his hotel room, William made his final decision. He would return to London, but not to bury the secret. Instead, he would arrange for James to learn the truth in a way that honored both his dignity and the gravity of the situation. The 70-year-old secret was about to be revealed, but William was determined to handle it with all the care and respect that both James and the Queen deserved. The next morning, William began making phone calls that would set in motion events that would change the British monarchy forever. After 3 decades of loyal service to the crown, he was about to become the man who brought its most carefully guarded secret into the light. The only question now was whether the institution he had served so faithfully would survive the truth he was about to reveal. William returned to London with a plan that had crystallized during his long drive south from Scotland. He could not simply burst into the palace with explosive revelations, nor could he approach James directly without proper preparation. The situation required delicate handling that would protect everyone involved, while ensuring the truth finally emerged with dignity and tact. His first stop was not the palace, but the office of Sir Geoffrey Morrison, the Queen's private secretary and one of the most trusted advisors to the royal family. William had worked with Sir Geoffrey on numerous security matters over the years and knew him to be a man of absolute discretion and unwavering loyalty to the crown. If anyone could help navigate this impossible situation, it would be him. Sir Geoffrey received William in his elegant office overlooking the palace gardens. The private secretary was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes that had witnessed decades of royal secrets and crises. He listened without interruption as William carefully explained his discovery, producing photographs of the key documents as evidence while keeping the originals safely secured. The color drained from Sir Geoffrey's face as he examined the papers. His hands trembled slightly as he studied the birth certificate, the DNA analysis, and the Queen's personal letters. For several long minutes he sat in complete silence, the weight of 70 years of deception settling over him like a heavy shroud. Finally, Sir Geoffrey spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. He confirmed what William had suspected. He had heard whispers of this secret early in his career, rumors that were quickly silenced and never mentioned again. He had assumed they were merely palace gossip, the kind of unfounded speculation that sometimes surrounded the royal family. Never had he imagined that the rumors were based on such devastating truth. Sir Geoffrey explained that revealing this information would create the most serious constitutional crisis in modern British history. The implications went far beyond mere scandal. They struck at the very heart of royal succession, legitimacy, and the legal foundation of the monarchy itself. If James Ashworth was indeed the Queen's eldest son, born before Charles, then technically the wrong person had been wearing the crown for months since the Queen's death. But Sir Geoffrey also understood the moral dimensions of the situation. He had served the royal family long enough to know the Queen's character intimately, and he could see in her letters the profound suffering that this secret had caused her throughout her life. He also grasped immediately the urgency created by James's grandson's medical condition and the potential for the secret to emerge through genetic research. Together, they developed a careful plan. Sir Geoffrey would arrange a private meeting with King Charles III to present the evidence and discuss how to proceed. William would return to Scotland to prepare James for a life-changing revelation, but would not reveal the full truth until they had royal approval for how to handle the situation. The goal was to manage the revelation in a way that honored everyone's dignity while minimizing damage to the institution of the monarchy. The meeting with King Charles took place 3 days later in the King's private study at Clarence House. William was struck by how much the King had aged since his mother's death. The weight of the crown seemed to have settled heavily on his shoulders. Sir Geoffrey presented the evidence methodically, watching as the King's expression shifted from confusion to shock to profound grief. King Charles studied the documents with the careful attention of someone who understood their monumental significance. When he came to his mother's letters describing her secret anguish over the son she couldn't acknowledge, tears filled his eyes. He spoke quietly about always sensing that his mother carried some deep sadness, some burden that she never shared with anyone. The King's reaction surprised both William and Sir Geoffrey. Rather than anger or denial, he expressed profound sympathy for his mother's impossible situation and genuine concern for the half-brother he had never known existed. He immediately grasped the injustice of James living his entire life unaware of his true heritage, and he was deeply moved by the potential medical implications for James's grandson. King Charles made a decision that revealed both his character and his understanding of what true leadership required. He declared that James must be told the truth and offered the full support of the royal family in dealing with the consequences. He authorized Sir Geoffrey to arrange for James to receive the best possible medical information for his grandson's treatment, and he expressed a desire to meet his half-brother personally once James had time to process the revelation. Perhaps most remarkably, King Charles acknowledged that James's existence raised serious questions about succession that would need to be addressed openly and honestly. He instructed Sir Geoffrey to begin consultations with constitutional experts about how to handle the unprecedented situation, making it clear that protecting the institution was less important than doing what was right. With royal approval secured, William returned to Scotland carrying a letter from King Charles intended for James. The letter, written in the King's own hand, expressed his desire to meet his half-brother and his commitment to ensuring that the truth was handled with appropriate dignity and care. It also included authorization for James to access royal medical records that might help his grandson's treatment. William arrived at James's cottage on a crisp autumn morning, finding the older man tending to his garden. James welcomed him warmly. pleased to see his new friend returning to the area so soon. But his expression quickly grew serious when William explained that he had something of enormous importance to discuss with him. They sat in James's comfortable living room, surrounded by photographs of his late wife and children, as William began the most difficult conversation of his life. He started by explaining his true identity as a member of the Royal Guard, and James's eyes widened with surprise and growing concern as he realized this was no casual visit from a fellow history enthusiast. William then presented James with Margaret Thompson's letter explaining how she had witnessed his birth and placement with Mrs. Ashworth 70 years earlier. He watched as James's face went through a range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally a kind of stunned recognition as pieces of his life began falling into place. The birth certificate hit James like a physical blow. He stared at the document that identified his mother as Queen Elizabeth II, his hands shaking as he tried to process information that contradicted everything he had believed about his identity. The DNA analysis confirmed what the documents claimed, providing scientific proof that could not be dismissed or explained away. But it was the Queen's personal letters that broke James's composure entirely. Reading his mother's words describing her love for him, her anguish at their separation, and her lifelong grief over the choice she had been forced to make, James wept openly for the first time since his wife's funeral. The letters revealed a mother's heart that had never stopped loving the son she couldn't acknowledge, and James finally understood the source of the inexplicable sadness he had sometimes glimpsed in the Queen's eyes during public appearances. As the initial shock began to subside, James asked the question that William had been dreading. What happened now? William handed him King Charles's letter, explaining that his half-brother wanted to meet him, and that the royal family was committed to handling the situation with honesty and transparency. James read the king's letter slowly, his expression shifting as he realized that his entire world had changed in the space of a single morning. He was no longer James Ashworth, retired engineer from Scotland. He was James Windsor, son of Queen Elizabeth II, brother to King Charles III, and a man whose very existence challenged the foundations of the British monarchy. The 70-year secret was finally exposed, but the real test of its impact was just beginning. How James chose to handle his newfound identity, and how the nation would react to learning about the Queen's hidden son, would determine whether the monarchy could survive the truth that had been buried for so long. The days following the revelation were the most challenging of James's life. He found himself struggling to reconcile 70 years of believing he was one person with the shocking reality of who he actually was. Every morning he would wake up hoping it had all been an elaborate dream, only to see the document spread across his kitchen table and remember that his entire existence had been rebuilt overnight. William remained in Scotland for several days, helping James process the information and prepare for what would come next. Together, they went through every document in Margaret's collection, piecing together the full story of James's birth and the elaborate arrangements that had kept his identity secret. James learned about the careful planning that had gone into his placement with Mrs. Ashworth, the ongoing financial support that had been provided anonymously throughout his childhood, and the network of trusted individuals who had helped maintain the deception. Perhaps most difficult for James to accept was the realization that Mrs. Ashworth, the woman he had loved as his mother, had lived her entire life carrying this burden of knowledge. She had raised him with complete devotion, while knowing that she could never tell him the truth about his origins. The sacrifice she had made, loving another woman's child as her own while maintaining absolute secrecy, struck James as both heartbreaking and heroic. James also struggled with complex feelings about his biological mother. Reading the Queen's letters revealed the depth of her love and the agony of her sacrifice, but it also raised difficult questions about the choices she had made. He understood the impossible position she had faced as a young woman preparing to become queen, but part of him couldn't help wondering what his life might have been like if different choices had been made. The most immediate concern, however, was his grandson David's medical situation. William had arranged for James to receive copies of extensive royal family medical records, and James's doctor was amazed by the detailed information now available. The royal physicians had maintained meticulous records going back generations, and this information proved invaluable in developing a more targeted treatment plan for David's condition. Within a week, David's medical team had identified genetic factors that had been invisible without the family history, and they were able to adjust his treatment accordingly. The improvement in David's condition was rapid and remarkable, a direct result of finally having access to the medical information that had been hidden with James's identity. For James, seeing his grandson's health improve provided powerful validation for William's decision to reveal the truth. But the medical breakthrough also highlighted the human cost of the long-kept secret. David's condition had been more difficult to treat because doctors lacked crucial genetic information that had been available all along, but locked away behind royal secrecy. James began to understand that the decision to hide his identity had consequences that extended far beyond questions of succession or royal protocol. It had literally endangered his grandson's life. King Charles, meanwhile, had been consulting with constitutional experts about the unprecedented situation. The legal implications were staggering. If James was indeed the Queen's eldest son, then technically he should have inherited the throne upon her death. The experts were divided about whether his illegitimate birth would have excluded him from succession under historical law, but everyone agreed that the situation created legal uncertainties that had never been tested in court. More challenging than the legal questions were the practical and political implications. The British public had accepted Charles as king after his mother's death, and the coronation had been planned based on his legitimate claim to the throne. Revealing that an older brother had been hidden away for 70 years would raise fundamental questions about the honesty and legitimacy of the entire royal institution. Sir Geoffrey had been working quietly with a small team of trusted advisors to develop various scenarios for how the revelation might be handled publicly. They considered everything from a quiet acknowledgement of James's existence to a full constitutional review of royal succession. Each option carried enormous risks, and there was no historical precedent to guide their decision-making. 2 weeks after learning the truth, James traveled to London for his first meeting with King Charles. The encounter took place in the king's private apartments, away from the formal protocols and public scrutiny that would have complicated their first conversation as brothers. William accompanied James, both as moral support and to provide security oversight for the sensitive meeting. The two men faced each other across 70 years of separation and secrecy. King Charles, at 75, bore the weight of recent kingship and the shock of learning about his half-brother's existence. James, at 70, carried the bewilderment of discovering his royal heritage and the grief of learning about his mother's lifelong suffering. Both men were struggling to understand how to relate to each other given their extraordinary circumstances. King Charles spoke first, expressing his profound regret that James had lived his entire life unaware of his true parentage. He acknowledged the injustice of the situation and took responsibility for the royal family's role in maintaining the deception, even though the original decision had been made before his birth. His obvious sincerity and genuine concern for James's well-being helped bridge the awkwardness of their first meeting. James, in turn, expressed his appreciation for the king's openness and his willingness to acknowledge the truth, rather than trying to suppress it further. He also conveyed his understanding of the impossible position their mother had faced as a young woman, and his recognition that she had made what she believed was the best choice under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Perhaps most importantly, both men recognized that they shared a common loss. Neither had been able to truly know Queen Elizabeth II as a mother, Charles because of the formal constraints of royal protocol, and James because he had been separated from her entirely. They found common ground in their grief for the woman who had loved them both, but had been unable to express that love fully due to the demands of her position. The conversation lasted for hours, covering everything from childhood memories to current concerns about the monarchy's future. King Charles shared stories about their mother's private moments and her expressions of unexplained sadness that now made perfect sense in light of James's existence. James, in turn, talked about his life with Mrs. Ashworth and the subtle ways that his royal heritage had perhaps influenced his character and interests without his knowledge. By the end of their meeting, both men had reached a crucial decision. They agreed that the truth about James's identity should be revealed publicly, but in a carefully managed way that honored both the Queen's memory and James's dignity. They would not allow the secret to remain buried, but they would control how it emerged to minimize damage to the institution of the monarchy and the people involved. King Charles made it clear that he had no intention of clinging to power if James chose to claim his rightful place in the succession. He acknowledged that James's birth predated his own, and that regardless of the legal complications surrounding legitimacy, James had a moral claim to recognition as the Queen's eldest son. The generosity of this gesture, coming from a man who had waited decades to become king, struck James as profoundly honorable. James, however, had no desire to claim the throne. At 70, he had lived a full life outside the royal family and had no wish to disrupt the natural order of succession. What he wanted was simpler but perhaps more important: acknowledgement of his existence, recognition of his mother's sacrifice, and the opportunity to finally be part of the family he had unknowingly been born into. As their first meeting concluded, both brothers knew they were about to embark on a journey that would change the British monarchy forever. The 70-year secret was about to become public knowledge, and the world would soon learn that Queen Elizabeth II had carried a burden of love and loss that had shaped her entire reign. The question now was whether the institution of the monarchy could survive the revelation of its most carefully guarded secret. The public revelation of James's existence was planned with the same meticulous attention to detail that had once been used to hide his identity. King Charles and his advisors understood that the news would shock the nation and potentially destabilize the monarchy. So they developed a careful strategy to control how the information emerged and how it would be interpreted by the public. The announcement was made on a quiet Sunday evening in November, time to allow for maximum thoughtful discussion before the chaos of Monday morning news cycles. King Charles addressed the nation in a televised speech from his study, speaking directly to the camera, with an honesty and vulnerability that surprised many viewers who had grown accustomed to formal royal pronouncements. The king began by acknowledging that he had information to share that would be difficult for the nation to hear, but that needed to be revealed in the interest of truth and transparency. He spoke about his mother's dedication to duty throughout her long reign, but he also acknowledged that this dedication had sometimes required painful personal sacrifices that the public had never known about. With careful, measured words, King Charles revealed the existence of his half-brother James, explaining that their mother had made an impossible choice in 1953 to protect both her child and the institution of the monarchy. He emphasized that the decision had caused Queen Elizabeth lifelong pain and that James had lived his entire life unaware of his royal heritage through no fault of his own. The king's presentation of the facts was masterful in its balance. He acknowledged the constitutional implications while emphasizing that James had no desire to claim the throne. He explained the medical circumstances that had made the revelation necessary, highlighting how the 70-year secret had potentially endangered James's grandson's life. Most importantly, he framed the disclosure as an act of honesty and healing, rather than a crisis or scandal. James himself appeared briefly at the end of the broadcast, speaking simply and with dignity about his shock at learning his true identity and his gratitude for finally understanding his family history. His genuine humility and obvious lack of ambition for power or recognition helped reassure viewers that this revelation was not a threat to the established order but rather a completion of historical truth. The public reaction was unlike anything anyone had anticipated. Rather than the constitutional crisis that many had feared, the revelation sparked a wave of sympathy for both Queen Elizabeth and James. The story of a young woman forced to give up her child for duty, and of a man who had lived his entire life as a loving lie, resonated deeply with people across all social and political lines. Letters poured into Buckingham Palace expressing support for the royal family's decision to reveal the truth. Many writers shared their own stories of family secrets, adoption, and the complex relationships between duty and love. The overwhelming sentiment was admiration for Queen Elizabeth's sacrifice and respect for King Charles's courage in choosing transparency over continued deception. The British press, initially poised for a feeding frenzy, found themselves covering a story that was more moving than scandalous. The Queen's personal letters, released with James's permission, revealed a depth of maternal love and personal sacrifice that transformed public understanding of her character. Rather than diminishing her legacy, the revelation of her hidden son added a profoundly human dimension to her memory. Constitutional experts debated the legal implications extensively, but their discussions remained largely academic since James had no interest in challenging the succession. A few Republican voices used the revelation to question the legitimacy of the monarchy itself, but they were overwhelmed by the broader public response of sympathy and understanding. James found himself thrust into a public role he had never sought but handled with remarkable grace. He gave carefully considered interviews explaining his experience of learning about his identity and his feelings about finally being acknowledged as part of the royal family. His obvious integrity and genuine character won over even skeptical observers. Perhaps most significantly, James's reunion with his extended family became a symbol of healing and reconciliation. He met his other half-siblings, Princess Anne and Prince Edward, both of whom welcomed him warmly into the family. He attended his first royal event at Christmas, standing quietly with his newfound relatives as they celebrated together for the first time. The impact on James's own family was profound and positive. His children, initially shocked by the revelation, found themselves proud of their father's dignified handling of such extraordinary circumstances. His grandson David, whose medical condition had sparked the initial urgency to reveal the truth, continued to improve with access to comprehensive royal medical history. William, whose decision to expose the secret had initiated all these changes, found his role in the story largely overlooked by the media, which was exactly how he preferred it. He returned to his duties with the royal guard, knowing that he had made the right choice in bringing the truth to light. His actions had not only revealed historical truth but had literally saved a young man's life and allowed a family to finally know itself. Completely, Margaret Thompson's cottage in Brambleworth became an unexpected pilgrimage site for people interested in the story. A small plaque was placed on the building acknowledging her role as the keeper of one of history's most significant secrets and her wisdom in ensuring that the truth eventually emerged. The wooden box that had held the evidence for so many years was donated to the Royal Archives, where it joined the official record of one of the monarchy's most extraordinary chapters. King Charles's handling of the revelation strengthened rather than weakened his position as monarch. His choice of honesty over institutional protection, his genuine concern for his half-brother's welfare, and his willingness to acknowledge past mistakes demonstrated the kind of moral leadership that the modern monarchy needed. Public approval of the royal family actually increased following the disclosure, as people responded positively to their newfound transparency. James settled into his new role as an acknowledged member of the royal family with typical quiet dignity. He accepted a modest title and began participating in selected royal duties, particularly those involving historical preservation and education. His expertise and genuine passion for history made him a natural ambassador for Britain's heritage, and his obvious lack of personal ambition reassured everyone that his presence would not complicate royal protocols. The 70-year secret that had once threatened to destroy the monarchy ultimately strengthened it by demonstrating that the institution could survive and even benefit from truth-telling. Queen Elizabeth's hidden sacrifice became part of her legacy of duty and service, while James's graceful emergence from anonymity showed that royal blood could manifest in dignity and character even without royal upbringing. The story of the Queen's hidden son became a testament to the power of truth, the complexity of love and duty, and the possibility of healing even the deepest family wounds. What began as a dangerous secret kept by a loyal seamstress ended as a celebration of honesty, courage, and the enduring strength of family bonds that transcend even the most extraordinary circumstances. In the end, the revelation that was supposed to destroy the monarchy instead revealed its most human and admirable qualities, proving that sometimes the most dangerous truths are also the most necessary ones to tell.